Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're lining up three very different people who all learned the same hard lesson. The bill for your behavior always comes due. One was a drunk attorney who thought professional standing made him immune to the word leave. Another was a contractor who spent years shortchanging people only to be paid back in perfect, silent fairness. And the last was a nurse who thought petty lies wouldn't lead back to her own browser history. And the last, three different kinds of entitlement. Let's compare whose moment of reckoning was the most deserved and the most complete. Stick around until the end because we're going to compare all three and decide which one really delivered the best outcome. And I want you to vote in the comments on which story deserved the win. My Halloween party ended with a drunken attorney refusing to leave my property for over an hour. For context, our town has an unofficial Facebook group for adult trick-or-treating. You can sign up in the group offering to provide alcoholic beverages to adults that show up requesting a tipsy treat. People make a real effort to find creative cocktails to offer. And our block is exceptionally awesome, in my not humble opinion. This year, we and a few of our neighbors decided to participate, and we all set up in our driveway, both to allow us to hang out together and to reduce the effort required by tipsy treaters to visit several homes. All was well until my wife and another neighbor's partner decided they needed to see what the other participants in the event were offering. They went around the neighborhood to visit other homes and returned with two guys in tow. One of the dudes was a home brewer, like me, so we immediately had something in common to discuss. I invited them into my home and offered them several of my personal creations. All good, everyone's having fun, and I offer them to help themselves to whatever they want from my personal stash. After a few hours, one of the guys politely excuses himself and heads home. By this point, there were close to a dozen people hanging out in the kitchen and enjoying increasingly inebriated conversation. No big deal, everyone lives within walking distance. We're all neighbors. Drinks are flowing and everyone is having fun. Well, eventually, two of the guests, one of which being the stray my wife brought back, start having a conversation about the politics. It gets heated, and the stray cat alternates between crying and becoming aggressive with the other guests. I was out of the room when it started, but as soon as I returned and saw what was happening, I tried to end the discussion in the interest of everyone's good time. This is a party, not the place for political nonsense. Well, stray cat would not let it go, despite repeated attempts. When it was clear he would not move on, I asked him to leave. He refused, at least 15 times. At one point, I had to stop another guest from physically removing him as I was hoping for a peaceful resolution that let everyone continue enjoying their evening. Well, long story short, after I announced everyone needs to leave because of this foolishness, he continued to stay and refused to stop forcing a conversation about politics. He accused me several times of supporting a candidate I loathe, and I finally had enough. I told him for the last time he had to leave or I would remove him. He refused, so I pushed him several times until I finally got him out the door. You opened your home, but he mistook generosity for a debate stage. Every refusal was a choice to disrespect the one rule that matters in someone else's house, the host's word. The pushes weren't an escalation, they were the direct consequence of his refusal to accept the end of the conversation. I avoided striking him, I avoided him being struck by any other guests. Definitely a non-zero probability, and he was trespassing for at least 30 minutes after being asked to leave. Minor physical contact to remove him was the kindest option, and I'm proud I chose it. However, after he was out of my house, he absolutely refused to leave my property. He felt compelled to continue his argument for an hour in front of my house. I finally threatened to call the police to make him leave, and he refused to believe I would do it. He kept on with his rant and threats to my neighbors. By the way, he works as an attorney. Police reports about his behavior could affect his status with the bar, and he claimed to have a new baby at home. Probably why he was at my house drunk and being stupid. I obviously don't want to ruin his career over a drunken mistake, but I feel like he left me no choice. But I understand the fact people do very stupid things when they're drunk. I've been there. I've done that. And I'm fortunate that few of my dumbest inebriated moments led to greater consequences. That said, his behavior was unhinged to the point I felt like I needed a public record of his behavior in case he decided to damage our property, or worse. Doesn't matter what his job is, he wouldn't leave your private property after being asked multiple times. Of all people, he knows the law and the potential consequences of his behaviors. It was his choices that led to this point. And our second story. Hospital revenge served cold. How a lazy nurse's false attire complaints led to her browsing history being exposed and her resignation. I work at a hospital that doubles as a research institution. Since I'm on the research side, I have to involve lots of other departments, and most people with whom I work are very chill and understand that I have to beseech them for things to do my job. I'm one of those she can go 100 hectares on a single tank of kerosene type of people, and I'm very on top of things, for which my coworkers value me. However, the one place where that camaraderie breaks down is with some of the nurses who work in my specific clinic, focusing on one particular disease. Honestly, I've done a good job of making most of the nurses like me. I bring them homemade treats sometimes, and I'm always extra friendly and approbative. With them. Some of them have their days regardless, and I put up with them. Right after I first started working in that specific clinic, unfortunately, one nurse in particular, let's call her Michelle, had decided that I was on her blacklist. Michelle hates doing work. She's like a kid playing Xbox when their parent asks them to help with groceries. She'll moan and groan, and if she helps at all, it's with an angsty indignation. I needed a series of blood tubes drawn in clinic for a patient one morning. Instead of down in phlebotomy, protocol rules, more complicated and stupid than it's worth getting into here. And Michelle was the only nurse available. She was extremely put off at my asking her to draw this protocol kit, despite my giving advance notice to clinic that this needed to be done. She clearly did not want to leave her computer, which was not open to anything work-related, but she begrudgingly went and drew the tubes. She was unnecessarily, profusely thanked by me just for doing her damn job. I came back down later to get a prescription signed for another patient, and a different nurse asked me what I'd done to upset Michelle because she'd apparently been going off about me to anyone who would listen. I explained what had happened. The other nurse informed me that Michelle was pissed at me and also felt my outfit, a white medical coat, a modest blouse, work pants, and high-heel boots, was too provocative. What? I just decided to let it go and try to avoid Michelle as much as possible. This did not work. I kept running into situations where the other nurses were busy seeing patients. I was forced to walk back into the nurse triage room, which is off limits to patients, and ask Michelle to draw 2 more of these blood kits in the next month. She was never happy to see me. She was always wasting time on her work computer when I entered the room. Maybe 2 or 3 days after that last kit draw, my supervisor called me in her office to discuss my presentation. She very nicely and with pity in her voice told me she'd received a report about my dress habits in patient-facing spaces. She said she personally hadn't noticed anything, no crap, but was obligated to discuss this with me anyhow. I assured her I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought about confronting Michelle, but decided not to because, loose cannon and whatnot. After a brief reminder of the dress code, I figured that at least it was over. It was not over. 2 weeks later, and I hadn't even asked anyone to draw any kits in the interim, a formal report was filed against me for my conduct in clinic. This went to the hospital and then my supervisor, who, even after reading the report, seemed totally clueless about what it could mean. I explained what had been happening with Michelle. But then my supervisor told me a second person had reported this as well on the same day as who was obviously Michelle. This time it was a patient. The patient had reported that I was dressing improperly for a patient-facing environment. Whoa. I asserted that I wasn't, but I was nonetheless put on probation, which meant that my supervisor, against her will, now had to come with me when I saw patients in clinic for the foreseeable future, and a nurse manager would have to accompany both of us when she was free, since I was dressing provocatively in patient-facing spaces, and that was her domain. Michelle's complaint wasn't about your clothes, it was a smokescreen. By painting you as the problem, she hoped to deflect any scrutiny from her own constant, brazen idleness at her workstation. But as you can likely guess from her browsing habits, Michelle was not the sort of person who needed more supervisors in her area. Fine, you want to punish me and force me to work in the eyesight of the supervisors? All right, let's get some supervisors down here as quickly as possible. My next in-clinic patient came in 2 days, and it was one of those stupid timed-in clinic protocol kit visits, which meant I was forced to ask one of the nurses to draw the patient's blood. I informed my supervisor, and we set off down for clinic. The nurse manager was in that day, so she accompanied the two of us. We all went back into the triage room so that I could ask for help with the blood draw. Michelle and one other nurse were there. What we saw upon entering was the other nurse entering vital signs for a patient into our health database, and Michelle sitting at her desk with an online clothing retailer open on one monitor and Facebook on the other. I asked for Michelle's help drawing the kit, and she sighed heavily and spun around to see two higher-ups looking on with disdain at her work computer. In embarrassment, she swiveled back and closed those two tabs, which revealed, you can't make this stuff up, a website for marital aids that had been open in another tab, about which Michelle had clearly forgotten until now. I just smiled and handed her the bag like nothing had happened. In the hall, my supervisor and the nurse manager were talking about Michelle's display just now. Apparently, she'd been previously warned about goofing off at work. The nurse manager told the supervisor that she was going to check all of Michelle's work computer activity, which I actually didn't know any supervisor could readily access. What followed was so incredibly beautiful that I hope it made the ending of this long post worth waiting for. According to the nurse who'd initially asked me what I had done to upset Michelle, her activity was searched. She was revealed to have been spending hours upon hours every day browsing the web, shopping, and using social media. Since she'd been previously warned about this behavior, she was given a formal write-up. But this was just the beginning. The day after the three of us went down to clinic, my supervisor called me in her office again. She told me that Michelle had fabricated the patient complaint about me and posted it from her work computer. How did they learn this? Oh, that'd be because she saved a draft of the message that reported me to the hospital, and she'd accessed the patient complaint/comment webpage the same day. My supervisor sincerely apologized for the hassle and told me I was no longer on probation. As for Michelle, apparently fearing the worst, she put her 2 weeks' notice in the same day after getting wind that she was in some far more serious trouble. For reasons I'll never understand as long as I live, the hospital chose to let her quit after 2 weeks instead of firing her on the spot. Maybe they knew what a nightmare she was and were comfortable letting her quit on her own accord. It's not as though she was due to glean any glowing references from this experience. Maybe they just wanted some extra work. Our clinic was very short-staffed for nurses at the time. In any case, they chose not to fire her and let her quit on her own. On Michelle's last day, I ventured down to the triage room to retrieve some outside records from their printer. When I entered, Michelle was alone and browsing Glassdoor. I unbuttoned my white coat and told her, "Hey, good luck with your next job. I hope the employees are less provocative." She slowly spun around with a scowl on her face. Then I lifted my dress up to my neck, flashed my bare boobs, and walked out. And I never saw Michelle again. Honestly, the ending is unhinged. But after everything she pulled, I get why you snapped. Would I recommend it? Probably not. Was it understandable after months of harassment and a fake complaint? Yeah. The real win here is that she's gone, your record is clean, and the truth came out. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. And our last story. How paying back a toxic boss with perfect fairness is the best revenge. Every now and then my phone rings with a number I recognize immediately, and I already know what the conversation is going to be. It's my buddy, let's call him Jim. Jim is one of those rare people in construction who can do just about everything and somehow still do it well. Framing, drywall, finishing, problem solving on the fly. He's fast, precise, and obsessive about doing things the right way. If he says a wall is square, you don't even bother checking it. It is. Jim didn't always have that reputation, though. When he first started out at 20, all he really had was skill and trust. And in construction, that combination makes you an easy target. He told me once that the hardest lessons he ever learned weren't about tools or technique, but about money changing hands when it shouldn't have. Back then, Jim worked under a guy named Caleb. Caleb wasn't dumb, and he wasn't lazy. He was a site supervisor with connections, which meant he controlled who got access to jobs and who didn't. Jim trusted him because they'd known each other for a while and because Caleb was the one who brought him onto a decent drywall job. The agreement was simple. Jim would knock it out fast, clean, and professional, and he'd get paid a set amount when it was done. Jim finished early, way early. Instead of dragging it out, he busted his butt and wrapped it up ahead of schedule. When payday came, Caleb handed him an envelope that felt suspiciously light. Half the money was missing. Caleb shrugged it off like it was nothing, said something about overhead, unexpected costs, and how Jim should still be grateful because the job came through him. Jim was young, didn't want to burn bridges, and told himself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. The second time was worse. Jim was on stilts most of the job, pushing himself hard, learning fast, and putting out work that made other trades stop and stare. He finished 2 full days early, and the drywall looked flawless. When it came time to get paid, Caleb shorted him again. Different excuse this time, same result. Jim didn't argue, but something clicked. You don't accidentally short someone twice. Not long after that, Jim started hearing stories. Other workers quietly confirmed what he'd suspected. Caleb had a pattern: promise one amount, pay another. Count on people being too busy, too young, or too desperate to fight back. Jim finished that job, took what he was given, and never worked for Caleb again. Instead, he focused on himself. He sharpened his skills, built relationships with people who paid fairly, and learned how to run a site properly. Within a few years, he wasn't just another guy on stilts anymore. He was supervising jobs, organizing crews, and still jumping in hands-on because he wanted everything done right. People trusted him, not just because he was good, but because he was fair. Fast forward about 5 years, Jim's calendar's stacked, houses going up everywhere, non-stop calls, steady money. He doesn't chase work anymore. Work chases him. That's when his phone rings with a number he hasn't seen in a long time. It's Caleb. Caleb starts the conversation like nothing ever happened, laughing, reminiscing, talking about the old days like they were some golden era. Jim lets him talk, doesn't interrupt, just listens, already knowing where this is going. Eventually, Caleb sighs and says it outright. He's been slow lately, could use some work. Heard Jim's running jobs now. Any chance he could help out? Jim doesn't hesitate. Yeah, he says, I've got something. Be at the site tomorrow morning. Caleb shows up early, tool belt on, ready to work, and to his credit, he does good work. No shortcuts, no complaints. Keeps his head down all week and handles his part of the job properly. The crew notices. A few guys even comment that Caleb seems different than they expected. Friday rolls around. Jim walks up to Caleb with an envelope and hands it to him. The exact amount they'd agreed on, not $1 more, not $1 less. Caleb opens it, counts it, and nods. Jim didn't just hand Caleb his pay, he handed him a mirror. For a week, Caleb got to live in the world Jim built, one where a handshake means something and hard work earns its exact due. The full envelope wasn't a gift, it was a demonstration of a principle Caleb had spent years stealing from others. Feels good, Jim says casually, like he's talking about the weather. Caleb looks up. What does? Getting paid exactly what you were told you'd get? Caleb freezes. Jim doesn't raise his voice, doesn't sound angry. If anything, he sounds calm, almost relaxed. I never got that from you, not once. But I wanted you to see how it's supposed to be done. Caleb starts to speak, probably to explain, justify, or apologize. Jim cuts him off, gently but firmly. You did solid work this week, that's why you got paid properly. But you're done here. Don't come back to this site. Don't call me for work again. The crew is quiet. Everyone heard it. Jim turns and walks away, leaving Caleb standing there with the envelope in his hand and nowhere to go. Later, one of the guys asked Jim if he planned to fire him no matter what. Jim shrugged. Yeah, whether he worked well or not didn't matter. I just wanted him to understand. And the thing is, it worked, not just on Caleb, but on everyone watching. Word spread fast. Jim didn't screw people over. He didn't play games. If he gave his word, that was the number you got. No surprises, no excuses. In construction, reputation is currency. Jim paid his debts forward, and Caleb learned, a little too late, what it feels like when the rules finally apply to him. When you line these stories up, the difference isn't the entitlement, it's the response. The first uses escalation only when safety demands it. The second lets documentation and oversight do the damage. The third waits, then applies fairness like a mirror. Same problem in all three, someone crossing lines and assuming there will be no consequences. So guys, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a new video every single day. Thank you all for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.